Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today, reacting to Kenny Pickett's debut for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the lone first-round quarterback in this year's draft. Sam, we'll have a breakdown of all the rest of the rookie quarterbacks on the big PFF NFL podcast. But let's focus on Pickett because he's the guy of all these rookie quarterbacks that has a chance to start this year. What'd you think of his debut against the Seahawks?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. And I was most impressed by, if you've listened to the big show, that's our podcast rather than the giant ex-wrestler. If you've listened to the big podcast and you've heard us talk about Kenny Pickett before, and in particular his chances of starting, you know that our biggest concern, or certainly my biggest concern, is how slow his average time to throw has been, just how slow his process is generally. It was over 3 seconds in college last year. That usually gets longer when a young quarterback comes into the NFL in his first season. If that was the same kind of story, he just has no shot of starting early. But it wasn't the case in this preseason game so far. His average time to throw, it's going to shake out at like 2.7 seconds overall, but that's skewed massively by like one play where it was positive extending the play, running around, trying to make something happen with his legs. You strip that out, you take away the scrambles, and it drops all the way down to 2.3 seconds, which is fast. Like that's closer to the faster end of the spectrum than it is at the slower end. So I thought Kenny Pickett looked pretty good. He was crisp. He was, pretty quick getting the ball out of his hands. Generally, hit the first target pretty quickly. The Steelers were also doing, a good job of limiting what they were asking of him, just rolling him out, moving the pocket, generally sort of simplifying his reads. But he took advantage of that and looked good.
Yeah, I was looking for the same thing you were, Sam, was, how quickly was he working through things? And you see this a lot in the preseason, right? I feel like we see way more boot action, right? The play action where you're rolling the quarterback. I feel like it's like the first play for every quarterback. Let's get that nice bootleg, get that nice easy pass. And Pickett had a couple of those, including one for a touchdown. So those are kind of gimmies for quarterbacks. They are, they're drive starters, or they're just ways to kind of mix things up for the quarterbacks. So there were some of those from the Steelers, screen game, whatever it was. But even on just regular reads, he threw a nice deep out, got rid of the ball quickly, as you said. To me, that was the biggest question for Kenny Pickett. Doesn't mean it's completely solved. Doesn't mean it's completely answered, but we're talking about first impressions here. And, a guy like Malik Willis, he had his ups and downs in his first impression. You kind of saw the whole gamut with the Malik Willis, but you saw that really slow, long time to throw, in part because of the scrambles. So you can kind of glean with something from how quickly are guys getting through their reads, getting the ball to where they need to go. And I think Pickett passed that first test, right? Getting rid of the ball, throwing the ball accurately, and just looking like he was comfortable in an NFL offense.
Yeah, it's funny. So his numbers: 13 for 15 for 95 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had a 2-point conversion in there as well, I think, as well. But the bigger thing is you kind of look at some of these numbers, and it's 6.3 yards per attempt. The average depth of target was just 5.5 yards. That's a really low number. These are kind of numbers that sort of show you that he wasn't asked to do a whole lot. But critically, what he was asked to do was get rid of the ball quickly, which was the biggest question mark I had about him. Like, nobody has any, I think, real concerns about whether Kenny Pickett can make the throws or, whether he can ramp up a degree of difficulty. The biggest question was, can he do it at an NFL kind of time scale? Because he wasn't doing that in college. And maybe that's just because the college environment allows you to take your time and, chew up 3.5 seconds per play. But you can't get away with that in the NFL level, and certainly not behind an offensive line like Pittsburgh's that isn't the best offensive line in the NFL. So the fact that statistically, it looks like they weren't asking a lot of him, but I think critically they were asking the most important question of him, which is, can he speed up his process? And at least on, 20 dropbacks, he absolutely did.
Football fans, join the next generation of fantasy football with Rainmakers Football, the first ever NFT fantasy game for DraftKings. It's the only NFT fantasy game licensed by the NFLPA. Now you can play all season long for millions in prizes by building the ultimate NFT franchise. Right now, everyone can get their first full roster starter pack for free. Playing Rainmakers is simple. You just buy, sell, bid, and win player card NFTs of the biggest names in the game through regular drops and auctions at DraftKings Marketplace. Draft lineups of athletes from your NFT collection and earn points for touchdowns, receptions, and more, just like daily fantasy football. Build your NFT franchise and enter free Rainmakers football contests all season long to compete for millions in prizes. The next generation of fantasy sports is here. Download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now. Sign up with promo code PFF, click the Rainmakers tile, and opt in to get your first card for free. Plus, play for millions in prizes all football season while building the ultimate NFT fantasy franchise with Rainmakers Football. It's promo code PFF. Build, play, win only at DraftKings. Contest entries dependent on type and number of NFTs held. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. All right, Sam, of course, the big question now is what does that mean for Kenny Pickett going forward? Because it's not like the other Steelers quarterbacks looked poor or anything. Mitchell Trubisky did all right in his stint, and Mason Rudolph as well. Both of those guys have been ahead of Kenny Pickett on the depth chart so far. You know my stance, though. It's not about Mason Rudolph. It's not about Mitchell Trubisky. If you draft a first-round quarterback, it's all about his development. And when he's ready, when you think he's ready for his development, you put him in. So is this enough to move Kenny Pickett up the depth chart?
Yeah, I mean, all three of those quarterbacks passed for at least a touchdown. All three of them had a passer rating over 100. It's worth noting that this came against the Seattle Seahawks, who have one of the worst-looking rosters in the NFL and weren't playing the starters. So, you know, when you're going into the depth chart, into the bench, when the starting point was one of the worst rosters in the NFL, things are not going to go well, you know? And when we saw that, like there were some Seahawks on this in this game that have some truly awful defensive grades. So yeah, it's all relative. You know, he passed that first test, but that first test was literally a kind of gimme of, is this even an option? Like, can you do this at all? And he could. So now we get to scale it up and we get to go, okay, let's increase the level of difficulty. Let's try it against a defense that's actually halfway viable. Let's try a little bit more complicated than the very simple read stuff we were asking of you to do. And let's see if you can still keep processing at this kind of speed. So I think, look, we know that Mitchell Trubisky is there keeping the seat warm for Kenny Pickett. And it really is about either how long it takes Trubisky to play his way to the bench or whether Kenny Pickett is going to be ready to operate at this kind of speed and pace of the game and processing time. And this, I just think, has to be seen as a massively encouraging step, that it is at least within his range of outcomes and could potentially happen much sooner than certainly I was expecting if it's judging by Pickett as opposed to Trubisky.
Yeah, remember, we try to make it a point here not to completely overreact to the preseason, but I'm guilty. You know, last year at this time, the rookies looked really good, Sam. Let's not forget how good the rookies looked last year. Zach Wilson looked like the very best rookie. Trevor Lawrence looked like, as advertised, number one overall pick, and like he was going to play like that during the season. Mac Jones was fantastic. So we were talking about, okay, maybe this class is incredible last year. And there was only one of the 5 first-rounders, one of the 6 that played last year that actually played well, and that was Mac Jones. So it's not overreaction season, but there's also a couple extremes historically, right? You have a 4th rounder like Dak Prescott who looked like he belonged the second he stepped on the field in the preseason. And then that same year, Jared Goff, the number 1 overall pick, looked like, man, this dude might never play in the NFL. Things changed for Goff, but it was telling that rookie season. Like, you needed to ease him in. So I think with Pickett showing, yeah, we can get rid of the ball. We can throw the ball on time. We can throw the ball accurately. You're right. I think the way you described it, it's in his range of outcomes that we're going to see him on the field and taking over as a starter. Whereas if he looked like an overwhelmed rookie Jared Goff did 5 or 6 years ago, it'd be like, all right, you know, maybe Kenny Pickett is going to be number 3 on the depth chart the whole season.
Yeah, look, preseason doesn't mean everything, but I think it's very clear what you can take from preseason. And usually it's a negative confirmation bias more than a positive one. Just because a guy comes out and looks good doesn't mean he's going to be good in the regular season. It doesn't really mean anything. For example, right now in the PFF grading, who have we got? The Blaine Gabbert is the number 1 graded quarterback based off a handful of snaps. You know, we know Blaine Gabbert is not any good, so it doesn't mean anything. But if you come out there and you're bad, you know, if you come out and you can't answer the question in preseason, that I think does mean something. So for Kenny Pickett to come out here and clear the first hurdle, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be week 1 starter or that he's going to be good, you know, year 1. But if he come out tripped and fallen face first in the first hurdle, that I think would have meant something. And it would have been, okay, Pickett's not starting anytime soon. So it's the first hurdle. It's the easiest one. There are going to be bigger hurdles down the track, but you've cleared the first one.
74 overall PFF grade for Kenny Pickett on 32 snaps. Good start. Good first hurdle, as you said, Sam. And I'm ready to see more of Kenny Pickett. Let us know what you think of Kenny Pickett's preseason debut. It's the PFF